Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Monday, August 21st. If you guys are reading the title or joining us on the YouTube, you can see that we are joined by another very special guest, Vivek Jacob of Raptors.com and the Locked On Podcast Network covering the Toronto Raptors. Vivek, how you doing today, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Vivek is obviously, he produces great content. He writes great articles for Raptors.com, and he is clearly an NBA junkie like myself. If we're here in the middle of August talking ball, talking Raps, it's not for the faint of heart to do NBA content in this time of the year. So we are super grateful to have him. And honestly, I'm very excited for this one because the Raptors, man, like they are a puzzling group. And I know Vivek knows the Raptors like the back of his hand, but I did just want to, before diving into it, just set the scene real quick for the Raptors' history since winning the championship in 2019, because it seems like they're going in a direction that might not be the best for the fan base. So let's just kind of lay it out again. Winning the 2019 title, obviously the following year, the bubble season, they lost in the second round to the Celtics of the playoffs, that is. The following year after that, they missed the playoffs altogether. They bottomed out. Obviously, were able to grab Scotty Barnes in the draft that following offseason. Then they got lost. They lost in the first round to the 76ers in a series that wasn't all that close. And then, of course, this past year, they lost to the Chicago Bulls, and DeMar DeRozan's daughter, DeAr DeRozan, playing a large role in that defeat, as Vivek knows all too well. Came up short in the play-in tournament. So they're in this kind of no man's land here. Now, they did make some moves in the offseason, obviously being able to grab Grady Dick out of Kansas with the 13th pick in the draft. They did lose Fred VanVleet to free agency to the Houston Rockets, that is. They signed Jalen McDaniels, Dennis Schroeder, re-signed Jakob Poeltl, and of course losing head coach Nick Nurse to Philadelphia, bringing in rookie head coach Darko as the new head coach of the franchise. So just wanted to set the scene and check in with Vivek here, man. After saying all that, I know you know that all too well. What are the vibes like, and where is this team kind of headed?
You know what? To that last point, I don't know if anyone knows where this team is headed. I think right now they're still up in the air in terms of, do you really focus in on development and the younger guys, or are you trying to hang on to something while Pascal is on the roster? And I think that's what people are waiting to see, because if you're all in on the development, then logically you probably move on from Pascal Siakam, as amazing as he is, and I think super highly of him. I think that would just be the logical decision to make. Seeing what the ceiling of the team is currently. And so if that's not the case, then maybe you look to move one of the younger guys or a couple of the younger guys to get Siakam another star to play with. So I think we're still in limbo with that. And in terms of the vibes, I think that's what the team is trying to reset now, right? Having moved on from Nick Nurse and a lot of the discontent that seemed to be plaguing the team last season, what does it look like now with Darko Rajakovic in the mix and his seemingly extremely positive energy and, just trying to bring some of that positivity back. So I think the vibes are a question mark to me. I won't say that they're completely resolved when we haven't even seen them play a game yet under the new regime. So it all sounds fine and dandy, but I would like to see what it looks like, after 10, 20 games of the season.
Yeah, that's all great points right there. And I think it's really interesting, right? Because, obviously the team achieved monumental success, winning the 2019 title, kind of stealing that away from Golden State. And you've slowly seen these stars and these pieces of the championship team trickle away, obviously losing Kawhi Leonard right after, losing DeMar DeRozan, losing Kyle Lowry, losing Fred VanVleet most recently. And really the only piece left of that championship core is, like you said, Pascal Siakam, who's still playing at an all-star level. But it just kind of begs the question with them being, exactly 500 last year. Again, losing, an all-star level talent in Fred VanVleet. It just kind of seems, and I hate to say it because I do like the Raptors, like they're headed in the middle of nowhere. And as we know in the NBA, the last place you want to be is right in the middle, right? You don't want to be in that, purgatory, as I call it, right? It's kind of where Washington was dwelling before they made the decision to blow it up this past year, right? It's kind of like where, Portland still kind of finds himself in that realm, depending on what happens with Damian Lillard. And you don't want to be right there in the middle. And, my question to you is again, like, if it was up to you, do you think that this team should look to rebuild? Now, obviously they have some really valuable pieces, right? It was reported that around the trade deadline, OG Anunoby, apparently there were multiple offers of three first round picks according to Zach Lowe. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that is a humongous price tag for a really, really solid player in OG Anunoby. You would imagine that Pascal Siakam's value, if anything, is maybe a little bit higher than that. Would it behoove the team to just get out in front of this thing, hit the big red button, blow it all up, and at least have a direction moving forward?
I think so. I think if Pascal Siakam, based on the reports, was willing to sign an extension with another team, I think we might have had a deal already. I think that's probably the biggest holdup. But I think if you're the Raptors, you also have to be able to pivot from that and say that, hey, if he's not willing to budge, then it's probably in your best interest to just lock in an extension and up his value that way. And so I think right now you're in between a rock and a hard place in the sense that, okay, teams get the impression that he's not willing to sign an extension with them, so they're only going to offer up so much. And if you're the Raptors, you're maybe, trying to play hardball with Pascal and say, hey, we don't think an extension is going to work out here, so you might want to change your mind and be open to going to some of these teams that are making offers. And so I think that's probably where they're stuck right now. But at some point, the Raptors will have to pivot and just say, hey, okay, we're not getting the offer that we want. So it's in our best interest to get him on an extension, have him on a long-term deal, and then other teams will look at that and say, okay, now, when he becomes available 6 months from now or whatever it is from when he signs his extension, now if you trade for him, you get him for 3 years or whatever it is. And I think then you start to get better offers than what you're getting right now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, right? Like it's kind of, I didn't even think about it in the situation of Pascal, right? But it's like this player empowerment movement, right? It's almost beneficial, and it seems like the mindset of these players is, all right, regardless of where I want to be over the next couple years, let me sign that contract first, most likely sign with my current team. That way they can offer me the max extension, secure my finances, get that back, and then we'll figure out the happiness and where I want to play down the road, right? And so it is funny, honestly, this doesn't get a ton of attention on the national media level, so I wasn't super informed on this situation with Pascal, but it's right. You hit it right in the head, right? Like you want him under that max extension, so at least his trade value, or not necessarily max extension, but under a lengthy extension. That way he becomes more of a movable piece. So I think that it is super interesting to think about, right? And if they were to head into this rebuild, right, it seems like the only core piece that they have on the current roster, or last year's roster anyway. Obviously, they just added Grady Dick, who obviously hasn't played a game yet. They want to see what they got there. But it seems like the building block is Scotty Barnes, right? There's no secret. Obviously, winning Rookie of the Year his first season and in a pretty loaded rookie class, right? That was a pretty tight Rookie of the Year race. Obviously, he had kind of on the national level anyway, it was pointed out that he's probably going through a quintessential sophomore slump, right? It just seemed like that luster had kind of worn off. He struggled to kind of start the year. I think he finished the year a little bit stronger than that. What does that ideal team look like if they were to tear it down to the studs, build around Scotty Barnes? What do you think is the type of pieces that you would need to surround him to put him in a situation to succeed? Are you of the, point Scotty camp? Do you believe that could be a real thing if having this, unorthodox 6'8", 6'9" defensive point guard, like is that what you envision, or is it something more traditional? Does he need some other playmakers around him to have the most success for this Raptors team if he's going to be the centerpiece?
Yeah, I think this is a big season in terms of understanding whether or not Scotty has a long-term future as a full-time point guard. I think, he's going to be kind of thrown into the fire, and whatever happens this season, whether there's growing pains, whether he just is amazing at it off the jump, they're going to just want to know, they're going to want to know what the results are, right? And I think that's an important thing, to just test it out. Let's get an answer on what this is, and then we can move on from there. So in terms of building a team around Scotty Barnes, I'll be honest with you, that's part of why I did not like the Jakob Poeltl trade. I felt that, obviously in a vacuum, Jakob Poeltl is a very good player, a really solid center in the league, and really good defensively, and he's going to make your team better. In terms of thinking about what a team built around Scotty looks like, I would want a center that can space the floor. Now, those are very difficult to get and very difficult to find, but that's part of the problem when you look at this Raptors roster, right? Like again, it's the pieces don't really fit, and especially with Scotty and Pascal being on the team together, having Yak next to them makes the spacing even more difficult. That's why even when you debate what the starting lineup should look like right now, you're almost forced to put Gary Trent Jr. into the starting lineup next to Scotty and OG, Pascal and Yak, just to get that spacing, right? Because realistically, you wouldn't want to put as much pressure on Scotty as a point guard. So it'd be nice to have Dennis Schroeder in there to help him out a little. But because of the spacing issues, it's like, okay, you know what? Logically, I think you just need Gary out there. And so I think you're forced into these decisions constantly with the current makeup of the roster. And so that's something that they're going to have to change up. And so, yeah, realistically, Scotty on the whole, you're looking at surrounding him with as much shooting as possible, smart cutting, because again, in terms of his vision, he's good at identifying that and finding those passing angles. So that's what you want to amplify if he's your point guard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point that, obviously this is an incredibly smart front office that's achieved a great deal of success over the last decade or so, but sometimes it is that simple, right? It just comes down to having guys that can space the floor, and sadly for the Raptors, it seems like they're pretty short on those guys, right? Like obviously OG, he has all this value on the free agent market, on the trade market rather, but again, he's still one of the only guys as well, along with Gary Trent, that can shoot the ball at close to a 40% clip. And, if you have, Scotty Barnes, who's had question marks from the outside, Jakob Poeltl, who's obviously a complete non-shooter, and, Siakam, that shot kind of comes and goes, right? But it is pretty difficult to envision that team around Scotty, with a lot of the pieces they have. It seems like there would need to be a pretty massive shift to get Pascal out of there, bring in some more shooters, maybe, find another center, like you said, that can shoot, at least a backup option for certain lineup flexibility there that would behoove Scotty. But, my question for you is let's make it fun, right? We're in the middle of August. There isn't a ton going on with the Raptors right now per se, but let's say Masai and company approached you, Vivek. They're like, hey, you do fantastic work for us on Raptors.com. You do great articles, talented podcaster. We want your opinion, right? If you could make any move within reason, right? One move, right? Now, obviously, you can get as creative as you want with this exercise. What would it be, right? Is it that, hey, maybe we should just kind of circle the block on those OG offers and get some draft capital in the building, right? We don't have I believe they don't have their first round pick next year. If that to be true, right? So maybe get some draft capital there. Is it moving on from Pascal, like, regardless, just kind of cutting bait on him now, bringing in some more perimeter shooting? What would be that one move you could make if Masai approached you today?
So I would look at it two ways. I do think that there is, because you have Pascal and Yak and OG, you can look at getting more into a win now window and just scoping out what a Scotty package gets you, right? Is there a superstar to be had? Is, like, say for example, if for whatever reason Dame Portland is not looking to move Dame to Miami, right? Can you get in there somehow and say, okay, we'll give you Scotty plus whatever, make the salary work, and get Dame to Toronto, right? And now he's playing with Pascal, OG, Yak. We'll have to see what that negotiation looks like.
Sure.
It would take a lot to get Dame, and so we don't even know if, like, does OG even stay in Toronto if that's the case, right? And so I think there's the one path there where you look at, hey, can Scotty still get you like a superstar type player and you stay in this win now mode, or then do you just move on from Pascal? I think that's the way the reports suggest they're leaning. And I think it would be simpler if Pascal was willing to sign an extension with another team. And so, yeah, and then you just enter kind of a rebuild, and kind of the model I look at with regards to Pascal, and Masai has experience with this. He traded Carmelo Anthony from Denver, right? And so, can you get those rebuilding pieces similar, something in that vein? Or you look at when Indiana traded Paul George, right? Obviously, Victor Oladipo's career has gone downhill because of injuries, but the type of player he was and looked like he could be, you want to find someone who offers that type of ceiling, right? That all-star caliber talent, maybe potentially all NBA talent. Like an even better example would be when um, the Clippers got Paul George, right?
Yep.
And you look at OKC getting Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, right? So can you get that really top tier young talent that hasn't it maybe isn't looked at the way he should, right?
Yeah.
And so another example that kind of is coming out of this is you look at the type of player Mikal Bridges looks like now compared to before the Suns trade, right? No
Yep.
one thought he would be that capable an individual offensive talent, and he's shown some really really good signs since the Nets trade. So who are those under the radar guys who haven't got as much opportunity but could potentially be all-star superstar type players?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's that separation, right? If you can do both and kind of double dip, like, hey, if you're moving away from an all-star and Pascal Siakam, I don't just want your three firsts, four firsts, whatever. I want that one, at least that lottery ticket, right? And obviously, there is no better example than the Paul George example. We actually just discussed that last episode with our guy Darian from the Locked On Clippers podcast because they get so much heat for that, right? Because now Shea's averaging 30 and you haven't even cashed in on those draft picks. That's obviously the best way a trade like that can go. But that is smart, right? Because this is still a competitive team. It's a team that has not obviously they bottomed out that one season. A lot of that was due to injuries and losing some of their core pieces of that championship team. But that being said, this isn't a team that's not how the Raptors roll. You know that all too well, right? Like they like to stay competitive. If you can get a young guy in there that keeps them in the play-in hunt, that's better for the fan base, and you still get some draft capital and some the chance to develop that talent. I think that's really smart. So I do also really want to comment on that zag on the Dame thing, right? Because it is so interesting that sadly the way that Dame and his camp have gone about this, that it's so damaging to all the other teams that would even think about it, right? Because unless you have some inside information on it for us, like we have no idea if the Raptors would even think about it because it's such a massive risk to trade for a guy of that talent, but he's unhappy, right? He's threatened to not really cooperate with these other teams, like to call your bluff and move on from a guy that is beloved in the fan base and Pascal Siakam. That's a major dice roll, but it could be worth it, right? Because pairing up Dame with some of the talent on that Raptors team, that's kind of an ideal fit for him, right?
Yeah, no question. And I think again, it's just where is Dame's head at right now? Is he really just hell bent on like Miami or bust? And is that just what the situation is? And is it just a matter of time before that deal actually goes down? That seems uh, to be what the scenario is. But it's a big if. If for whatever reason Dame would entertain Toronto. If Portland were to be like, hey, Toronto's got this great offer for us, it would set us on the right path. We've already got, pieces like Scoot and Shaden and, we throw Scotty in there. We really like what we can do going forward. This would really help us out, and you would still get a really good situation in Toronto. Would you be amenable to that? I think that's where it just comes down to what Dame wants, right? And if he just comes back and says, hey, I've said it from the beginning, Miami or bust, Miami or bust, Miami or bust, then then you're out.
Yeah, yeah. It's again, the players have all the chips right now, man. It's like, will the league step in? Is this going to get ugly? Are we going to have, is having two of these situations simultaneously with Damian Lillard and James Harden going to be the breaking point for the league? Where it's like we have to do something. We have to throw out some threats. We have to, inflict some punishments. We have to reduce some salary. We have to do something to get these guys from holding the league hostage like this. But it is fascinating. I do think Toronto is sitting there, if there were to be a situation to a change to that situation and maybe some of the power is taken away from Dame, if they could step in and make a play, they'd be, leading the charge and being able to offer a really competitive package for that guy and offer a really competitive fit for when he gets there to be one of the teams to contend in the East. So, with that, obviously the team has made a lot of transactional change with the players on their roster, but potentially the biggest change of the offseason is the departure of Nick Nurse, right? Obviously, regarded as one of the best coaches in the entire league, somebody that's won a championship, just, basically 4 years ago at this point in time. Still a relatively young guy. What is your thought process on, seeing him walk out the door, obviously coaching the Philadelphia 76ers next season? Did you feel it was time for a change, or are you guys really going to feel, you think you guys are going to end up missing Nick Nurse sooner rather than later?
I think it was time for a change because it seemed like he wanted a change. And
Yep.
I think especially after that game in Philly, or before that game in Philly rather, where he was already seemingly being reflective and saying, 10 years in one place is a long time, and uh, talking up the possibility of leaving. I think he might have already been checked out at that point. And so I do think that it was the right time to move on in that sense. And, the one thing I will say about Nick Nurse is it's amazing that he's gone to all these different places and won at different levels, right? Whether it's the British Basketball League, whether it's the G League, obviously done it at the NBA level. We have not seen him stick around with the team for very long in any of those places. And so he might just be that type of coach. I kind of make the joke that, he might be the Jose Mourinho of the NBA. And like, it's 3, 4 years at a spot, and that's all that he's really, tailor made for. And so I think that might have been the situation with the Raptors. And he's kind of wore out his time, and he seems okay with that. And so we'll see how his time in Philly goes. Uh, I don't think the Raptors will miss him in the sense that he is someone who is tailor made for the playoffs, right? And get you wins in those high pressure, um, high leverage situations. And I don't think the Raptors are going to have many of those for the next little while. So,
Yeah.
in that sense, I don't think they'll miss him that much.
That's a great point, right? I think, the first thing you said on just like, being time for a change, like in this era where we're going to see less and less players like the Tim Duncans and the Kobe Bryants and the Steph Currys that presumably will play their entire career with one single team. It's probably less likely that we're going to get the coaches like that too, like the Greg Popovich, for example. Like that is going to become farther and fewer in between with, again, these players and these coaches having the flexibility and the power that they do. I think it's really difficult to obviously coach a team through true ups and downs, right? Just a few years ago, you're on top of the world, winning a championship, contending for a title, and then within 2 years of that, you completely bottom out. And again, it's to no fault of the front office. You do that Kawhi deal a million times over, but when he wants to leave right after that, it's like, well, that's tough. You can't really just replace that overnight. So I think that makes total sense. And a criticism of Nick Nurse, right, is like, despite, like you said, he's obviously highly regarded as a grinder, somebody that can get wins in the playoffs, really smart defensive philosophy. But if there was a flaw, I would have to imagine it's the development of some of the younger players, right? Maybe it's his tendency to just, play guys, his guys, his core 5, 6, 7 guys, 35 plus minutes per night. It is really difficult for some of the younger guys on that roster to get some shine. Now, I know that the Raptors haven't exactly been hot in the draft lately, but do you think like bringing in a guy like Darko could help, really, determine if there are any hidden gems on that roster that, already exist that just haven't been discovered yet? Did you have any guys that kind of come to mind that could, kind of shine with a new coaching staff?
Well, I don't think, anyone's a lock to just completely be, unveiled under Darko, but I think the ones that I'm curious to see what Darko can do with are, Precious Achua, probably at the top of the list, in terms of the potential that he's teased. How do you get that out of him on a consistent basis? I think he's someone I'm curious to see. I think McDaniels is another coming over here, and I think getting more of an opportunity. I think he'll be an interesting play. Malachi Flynn, all the discussion that's been had over him and not getting opportunities under Nick Nurse. Okay, well, what does that look like now under Darko Rajakovic? So those three guys are probably who I'm looking at, and then on a different plane, let's say at a higher level, the obvious ones, Scotty Barnes. How does that point Scotty experiment go? And Gary Trent Jr. I think he seems like a one-dimensional player at this point in his career, and so there's obviously a lot made of Rajakovic's relationship with Desmond Bain and how he challenged him to be a really complete player, and helped him with his playmaking and things like that. So what can Darko help him with in that regard? And obviously the staff, when you look at the majority of the staff he's hired, they're development guys. And so I think how they all come together to improve those guys will be very interesting to see. One guy I haven't mentioned, Christian Koloko. I think he's an intriguing prospect, and so how his development comes along as well. So a lot of question marks. Those are the guys at different levels that I'm looking to see what happens this season.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that, regardless if they make the decision to pull the plug on guys like Pascal and OG, like there is some excitement there just for change, right? I think that it might, changes. It's time for a change with the Raptors office, I think, front office, and I think not front office, with their roster rather, and how they allocate their minutes. But I think that could be a lot of fun. There's a lot of athleticism there. Precious, obviously, such a special defensive talent. Can you get him to be just, a league average on the offensive end of the court, and that would do him wonders, and obviously could get him some minutes at the center position as well. So I think that's really exciting, and I'll be looking to see how that, shakes out for the Raptors as well. Vivek, before we let you go, one more fun exercise. I had to ask you this because the Raptors are a pretty fascinating franchise, right? And there's a lot of different ways you could take this question. But I want to ask you, as somebody so close to the team, who are your top 5 Raptors of all time?
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Lowry, for me, greatest Raptor of all time. I think everything that he's meant to the franchise, and some of the situations where he could have been moved or looked like he was about to move on, and then he ends up staying with the team. It's almost like this predestined thing that was meant to be. And the
Yep.
way he's grown, like you look at what his reputation was when he joined the team, and what his reputation was had become by the time he left. Made himself an all-star, made himself one of the best defensive point guards in the league at his prime, and that pull-up three, the way that shot came along to get to his peak, that was incredible. And like all the intangibles he brings, and obviously lifting the championship, that makes him the greatest Raptor of all time in my eyes. And then you go Vince, DeMar, Kawhi has to be in there just for being the guy that brought the championship, the main guy on the team. So what? That's four.
Yep, that's you
And
got
now,
4 right there. So the fifth spot, you said DeMar, you said yeah. So I guess it's kind of for me, I'm guessing, and maybe for you as well, a toss up between Bosch and Siakam. It's kind of where you lean there, right? Siakam's obviously got the ring, but Chris Bosch was all that franchise had for that brief period of time. So it's interesting to see where you're
yeah.
going to go there.
So I will say I absolutely love Chris Bosh. I don't think he gets a fair shake in terms of credit for what he accomplished during his time in Toronto, and I think people criticize him unfairly for the way he left. And I think if you were with the team at that time and you think about the fact that in all those years, the best player that they put next to Chris Bosh was what, Hiro Turkoglu.
I think you're right. I mean, you would know. Yeah, I mean,
um,
he had Vince for like what, like a half season at the start of his career, maybe a
yeah,
season and a half, obviously, which was kind of fun. If you had kind of let that play out, obviously, if Vince didn't get out of town, like that could have been a really fun duo there. But no,
for sure.
there was not a lot of talent surrounding Chris Bosh at all.
Exactly. So, um, I think he was perfectly well within his rights to leave. And so, having said that, I do think Pascal Siakam's career to this point puts him ahead of Chris Bosh. I think, obviously, what was essentially the game winner in the finals, going up against Draymond Green, the way he played throughout that championship run was incredible. You look at his story, coming from uh, Cameroon and building his career at such a late stage. He was a guy who played soccer first and just came to basketball late. And to be in the G League, what was then the D League, and to win a championship there, then to come to the Raptors, win a championship, take his game to the level where he's been on the All NBA team 2 times, he's been an All Star 2 times. Like, no one would have plotted that out for Pascal when he was first drafted and looked like nothing but a rim runner. Heck, Dwayne Casey, when he was drafted, compared him to Bo Outlaw. And he doesn't look anything like Bo
Yeah.
Outlaw now.
Yep.
So, so all of that, I would put Pascal Siakam in my top five, and there you go.
Yeah, man. Pascal's got such a great story. You know, you see guys that average 4 points a game in their first season in the league and then 7 points the following year. Like, fan bases don't have patience for that anymore. They're like, get him out of here and send him off, get a second round pick for him. And then next thing you know, the dude is, playing an extremely valuable role on a championship team just a season after that. That's great. I love those points. I think that's a super fair list. For me, I'm a Celtics fan, so I feel like my team has to go through Kyle Lowry like every single year in the playoffs, like to this day, and I can't stand watching him because he's just so frustrating, but he's so damn smart that, like, I obviously respect him. And, as somebody that supported Marcus Smart for the past, 8-9 years, like, I understand what it's like to be like, man, if this guy wasn't on my team, I would hate this guy's guts. And Lowry is like, a perfect example of that as well. So,
Yeah.
for me, I tossed a list together. Obviously don't have as much knowledge as you. I had Kawhi at the top spot, but it is disrespectful to not give at least some of the longevity to guys that were a part of that championship team like Lowry, that obviously they weren't necessarily the best player on the team, but I think that you have a pretty good argument to be made for a lot of those guys. But Vivek, thank you so much for your time, man. This is fun. This is great to get an inside look at the Raps and kind of their puzzling situation. We're definitely going to keep tabs on how they do to start the season. If they have any other big moves, we'll be watching. But before I let you go, just tell the people where they can find you, where they can find all of your awesome content.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob. You can follow my work on the Raptors at raptors.com. And besides that, I do some soccer content, some tennis content. I have a Substack called The Sports Student, so you can sign up for that. The link should be in my Twitter bio. And again, Nick, thanks so much for having me.
Highly recommend you guys check him out, man. He does fantastic work, great articles as well, great appearances on the Locked On podcast network for the Raptors as well. So be sure to check him out, and I will talk to you guys next week. Before I let you go, be sure to follow the show at Words with Wallace on everything, and we'll be back with another episode next week. Peace.